So I am currently waiting to go into work. I am a customer service agent at a local medical company. So I'm waiting for my shift to start. So I thought I would take a brief moment and just talk to you about my view on what has gone on with Robby in the last 17 years. So, as I had stated in our first video, Robby has something called polymicrogyria. It is not something that we were always aware that he had. It is actually quite a new diagnosis within the last couple of years. So just a backstory, he is a twin, as you know. I had them when I was 21 years old. They were born at 36 weeks, and they were quite large for twins. They were 6'9" and 6'7". We knew that they were going to come early, so there was a lot of steroids and whatnot that I had to take to prepare them to come into the world early. So everything was great. I had them, like I said, 36 weeks, and that was because of Alex. He decided that he was going to get stuck in my ribs. So they took them emergency C-section, 6'9" and 6'7". So they're quite big babies for being two, and being early. They stayed at the hospital just a few days. Nothing spectacular happened as far as complications or anything. Robert had a little bit of jaundice, but nothing that had to be treated with any UV lights or anything like that. So soon into their development, as they got older, about 6 months, we noticed Robby was kind of doing this curl to the left. He didn't want to go and straighten his neck, and his hand was kind of wrapped around his thumb. So we went to the doctor, obviously, many times, and the doctor was saying, oh, you know, it's to be expected, there's two of them, you're comparing. So we finally switched doctors because that was not an answer that we had liked. We switched doctors, and the doctor that we switched to sent him for to a neurologist for some assessments. And at that time we were told that he had semi-paresis cerebral palsy. So it affects just part of his body. He was in birth to 3, learned how to walk. He got some control over his mouth muscles. He was constantly drooling. This kid was drooling non-stop. Got control over his mouth muscles. We did some therapies with different spices and tastes and textures to try to gain control of the mouth muscles, which he eventually did learn how to go and keep the drool inside through those different therapies. Birth to 3 is a fantastic resource for any kiddo that isn't meeting the milestones that they should. So at 3 years old, he graduated from the Birth to 3 program, and he started a preschool program. Now, this preschool that he started was specifically for disabled children. And he did great. He had a paraprofessional from day one, and they did great with him. They worked with him on toilet training because of his intestines. They don't quite work like everybody else's. So he had a lot of trouble learning how to control his bowel movements and his urine, actually, at that point in time. So he worked really hard to first use the restroom to urinate, and then eventually he did learn how to use the restroom to defecate as well. So as he started to progress through the school system, he continued to have a paraprofessional. The paraprofessional was fantastic. Her and the nurse would work side by side to go and help clean him up if he were to soil himself at school. I apologize, the mail truck just went by at work. And then, you know, stuff just wasn't jiving with him as far as his learning. He is behind in his learning currently, which is to be expected. He, I would say, at the age of, oh God, maybe 5 or 6, we just started noticing some very ritualistic behaviors that he was doing. He was making noises, he was making grimaces and different facial expressions, and, you know, snapping, clucking, whistling, tapping his feet, screaming underwear at the top of his lungs repetitively. We brought this up to his pediatrician. That, along with him having certain rituals that if he were to break, he would be very, very, very upset. Now, his doctor's office at that time was a teaching office, so people would go and finish up their residencies, and at that time he asked, because of him being a teaching office, if they could turn on the cameras in the room, and he would step out. So obviously gave him permission, and he sat there and he watched what was going on, and he came back and he said, you know, we do think that there is something else going on. Let's go and have him diagnosed further by people who specialize in these ritualistic behaviors. So he did go to a fantastic doctor who went and gave him an assessment, found out that he at that time had Tourette's, which would make up for the facial grimaces and the uncontrollable need to say things like underwear repetitively. So during that doctor's visit, he also was diagnosed with something called PDD-NOS, which is a form of autism that is no longer a classification. They've redid their classifications of autism a few years back. So now we had something to work with as far as his rituals, his touching, he would touch things and smell things that were the most repulsive smells that you could think of. He had obsessions with storm drains and just like the most peculiar things. He saw stuff like storm drains and he would have to step on it and yell into it. And if not, then he would have a meltdown. To the point where you would think that his head was going to spin and pea soup was going to come out of his mouth. Obviously, just making a little light of that now. But anyhow, we had something to go on. We had a lot of research that we had to do. We had to find out different coping techniques and whatnot. And then we ended up finding this amazing program for autistic children. It was a behavioralist that specialized in autism, and the owner of the company came out to the house, and he worked with Robert. There was some very trying things that Robert would just not have. So what I mean by that, there was points in times where if Robert and Alex, Robert and Bailey, if he was playing with somebody, he would kind of play alongside them, not necessarily with them. And during those times, if the person that he was playing with were to go and play with the toys in a manner that he did not find fitting, he would turn around and throw these objects at them, or he would start hurting himself. He was very notorious for banging his head on things. So for the longest time, he had a lump right in the center of his forehead from just the repetitive banging when he was displeased. So Andrew Vogel, who was the behavioralist that worked with Robert, had come out to the house. He challenged us to challenge him. He wanted us to take different courses, different paths to stores that Robert didn't like. He challenged us to play with things in manners that they weren't meant to be played in, to show him that things are unexpected. However, it's not the end of the world. Just because there's construction on the way to Walmart doesn't mean that Walmart's not going to be there when we get there. Or just because someone's putting your train on the track the wrong way from how you want it doesn't mean that it's not enjoyable. So after all this time of doing that, he learned to be a little bit more go with the flow, if you will. Now the school system, their school system, they are great now, but getting to this point was, it was fun. At the beginning, when he was in elementary school, after preschool, elementary school, they kind of butted heads with us. They refused to see that he's not disgruntled or naughty or anything like that. They were thick-headed. It got to the point where I was at the school almost daily, calling PPT meetings weekly, hired different advocacy agencies to go and help get his school system under control. They refused, point blank refused, for the longest time to recognize that he had autism. Once we started smoothing stuff out, I would say was in middle school, where stuff started coming together. And like I said, now they are fantastic. I couldn't ask for a better high school for him to be in. But it took a lot to get him there. So while in middle school, like I said, there was many trips to the school, many PPTs, weekly PPTs, to go and make sure that his schooling was where it needed to be, that he had the services, the resources, the supports that he required to go and thrive and bridge the gap between him and the typical peers, as they call them. So when Robert was, 2 years ago, so he was a freshman in high school, he started falling. He had always been on the smaller side as far as his percentile, the growth percentile. He'd always been below the 5th percentile. So he was smaller. He was underweight. So he went through this massive growth spurt freshman year. And we kind of expected it. We were told that his puberty was going to be a little bit delayed because everything just wasn't, typical. So we expected him to have a delayed puberty. Well, when that came, he started falling. He fell into everything. He couldn't walk through a doorway without bumping into it. He would kind of lean on walls. He was just having a hard time. We brought him to therapy, which he's always been in therapy. We do therapy daily at home. We stretch out his legs. We do deep joint compressions, deep tissue massages, just to kind of make sure that everything's working as well as it could be. And then he went back to the therapist to find out what was going on, to see if it was something with the cerebral palsy, because at times with cerebral palsy, when you do have extenuating growth, the muscles and the ligaments and tendons don't move with the bone like they should. So that will cause a lot more rigidity for the muscles that are already rigid. So we went to the therapist, and they went and they worked with him. It was daily that we were working with the therapist. And they said, well, we think it might be a little bit something else going on. So at that point in time, Robert had never had an MRI. The reason being because we thought we knew what was going on. We thought that he had the cerebral palsy because of brain damage that had occurred when I was pregnant with them. When I was pregnant, there was preterm labor that had occurred, and I was in Yale New Haven Hospital for weeks, and that's when they put me on all those steroids to make sure that they were as developed as possible when they were born. So we had sat down with a pediatrician after the physical therapist said, I think there's something else going on. And we decided to go back to the neurologist. So we did. We went to the neurologist. The neurologist went and did an assessment, said, yes, there's something going on. Let's find out. It's time for the MRI because we want to make sure that there's no new brain damage going on. Even though I don't understand that because there was never a guideline as to where he was to begin with, if that makes sense. So he went for his MRI, and this December was 2 years that we had gotten the diagnosis of the polymicrogyria. When I seen the MRI photos, my heart sunk. Now your brain's supposed to have a little bit of asymmetry, but not like this. And I'll put snapshots of those MRI photos at the end of the video. And I somehow had to go through kind of a mourning. I feel like every time he would have a diagnosis, I went through a mourning of things that he should be doing that he's not going to be doing. I mourned, and I felt sad because he's not going to be able to do that. Anyhow, we got the diagnosis, and at that point in time, the doctor wasn't able to see us for quite some time. So he said, go online, look it up. Not the best thing to do. Just a heads up, if a doctor ever tells you go online, look something up, do not go online and look something up. Because this condition is scary. It's one of the most unknown brain deformities that you can have. And there's a vast area of degrees of severity. And then we had to sit down and talk about, stuff of, life expectancy and complications that could arise because of this brain deformity, which is something we'll get into later. I just about have to get into work. I just wanted to go and talk with you a little bit without Robby around, because it isn't all rainbows and butterflies, like I had said before. So I will touch base with you in 8 hours, I suppose, on the way home, just to go and finish up this talk. I appreciate you guys and your patience and your kindness of watching these videos. And we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.